Richard and Lena Kretschmer were ardent Nazis. In the summer of 1939, they petitioned Hitler to euthanize their 11-month-old child, Gerhard, who had been born blind and with deformed limbs. The parents hoped to contribute to their nation by eliminating their child from the nation's genetic heritage. Gerhard is one of the countless victims of eugenics in the 20th century. Nazis' genetic cleansing began with defective children. The program was soon expanded to genetically sick adults and Jewish people. The belief that Jewishness was carried on chromosomes, inherited to children, and therefore should be eradicated, required an incredible distortion of logic. This twisted pseudoscience was used as a justification to persecute and murder millions of innocent individuals. Eugenics is one of the biggest mistakes in the history of science. Both Darwin's theory of evolution and Mendel's genetics, when properly interpreted, do not provide any legitimate basis for genetic cleansing. How were they misunderstood and distorted into eugenics? Ironically, the basis of eugenics was created by Charles Darwin's cousin, Francis Galton. He was one of the closest scientists to Darwin, and the one who misunderstood and distorted Darwinism the most. Galton believed that for any creature, including human beings, it was better to be good rather than bad. It was better to be healthy than sick, strong than weak. Almost all the progressive intellectuals of this time, including Galton, falsely interpreted Darwinian theory as a proposal to interfere with human natural selection, in order to improve the genetic heritage of humanity. Galton's followers were soon proposing eugenic policies, including licensed reproduction and sterilization of the disabled. From Winston Churchill to Theodore Roosevelt, many politicians became passionate advocates of eugenic intervention to better humanity. Indeed, it became politically incorrect in elite circles in Britain, France, and the United States, not to support eugenic policies. In other words, to be against eugenics was seen to be uncaring about the future of the human race. In Germany, people gradually learned to be ashamed of any feeling of sympathy with their Jewish friends, under the pressure of state-sponsored propaganda. Today, we have a consensus that eugenics is morally and scientifically wrong, so it is easy to deny eugenics and criticize people who promoted it. However, take a moment to imagine this. If everyone around you believes in eugenic ideals, can you recognize its fallacy? If you were in a society where criticizing eugenics would lead to being criticized in turn as not caring about the future of humanity, would you be able to raise your voice against it? Eugenics has always been wrong, in both evolutionary and genetic terms. First and foremost, eugenics profoundly misinterpret the theory of evolution. Eugenicists insisted on artificial selection, to eliminate bad genotypes, and promote human good. But in nature, diversity is the norm, not the exception. In fact, genetic variation in a species is a vital asset for potential adaptation, and the benefit far outweighs the liabilities. Without this genetic diversity, a species will eventually lose its capacity to adapt. Also, no genotype is inherently superior. It is not that a longer neck is better for giraffes. It is just that a longer neck is fit to the specific environment in which giraffes happen to find themselves. Eugenicists relentlessly pursue intelligence, beauty, and health, as if there were absolute standards for these qualities. But there is no objective definition for them. It is just about fitness for a particular environment. Second, it is impossible in principle to achieve the eugenic ideal. Any genetic feature is not determined by one gene in a one-to-one manner. For instance, there is no gene exclusively for intelligence or health. Genetic diseases are caused by complex interactions of different genes. Also, a gene for a genius in one environment could be the gene for a mental disorder in another environment. Therefore, it is effectively impossible to single out and eradicate a specific selection of genes that cause diseases or disorders. Some scientists issued a moral warning against the oversimplification of the logic of genetics, but they were ignored, and could not stop the misuse of Darwinism and genetics. Eugenics was nothing more than a set of ideologies, far from qualifying as science. Nonetheless, the majority of the population supported or accepted eugenic policies. Why couldn't science stop eugenics? Public opinion tends to gravitate towards the one with the least cost of building consensus. When a concept is complex, difficult, or counterintuitive, there is a lot of friction for reaching a consensus, because we need to invest a large amount of time and energy learning and understanding it. Additionally, when a certain idea contradicts our favorite belief, the cost for agreement is high, because we have to overcome the temptation of cognitive biases to continue believing what we want to believe. We Homo sapiens want to understand the world as narratives with a series of intention and causality. Darwinian evolution, which claims that everything is the result of randomness and coincidence, is therefore very likely to be misunderstood. As for genetics, it is much easier to believe that a single specific gene is responsible for a disease or Jewishness, than to understand the intricate interplay of various genes and the environment. Properly understanding Darwinism and genetics has a lot of obstacles. Furthermore, there was a societal background encouraging the majority to support eugenics. During the 19th and 20th centuries, there was fierce competition between nations, and they were not affluent enough to allocate sufficient resources to social welfare. Since modern total war required the effective mobilization of all economic power, resource allocation within the nation had to be carefully considered to succeed in warfare and economic competition. Eugenic ideologies, which scientifically supported the exclusion of the disabled or minority groups from resource allocation, easily gained acceptance by the public. After all, we tend to be indifferent to the truth and correctness, mostly subconsciously. We prefer simple explanation than complex theory, and holding our favorite belief than revising it. Since we are busy both physically and mentally, it is hard to spend time and energy understanding a complicated idea that may go against what we want to believe. Eugenics had a low cost of consensus building, so scientific correctness couldn't halt its progress. Eugenics is arguably the biggest mistake in the history of science. It contributed to human rights violations and persecution of minority groups by providing scientific support. One crucial takeaway from the fault of eugenics might be to ask ourselves, what truly defines science? The most distinct characteristic of science is its willingness to admit its mistakes and ignorance. Modern science is based on the assumption that we know very little about the world. Even more critically, it accepts that the things that we think we know could be proven wrong, as we gain more knowledge. When a qualified scientist publishes a paper, he or she do not insist that it is an absolute truth and never to be questioned. Instead, they think as follows. This theory seems to be the closest to the truth within the limits that humanity can currently achieve. However, if research progresses or evidence refuting it is found, this theory can always be denied, updated, or revised. By contrast, traditional religions assert that everything that is important to know about the world was already known and written in sacred texts. In fact, the progress of human society had been quite slow, while God and the Bible claimed their perfection. If everything was already shown by God, why do we have to research and study? It was only after we realized our ignorance that society began to advance exponentially. The essence of science is this intellectual humility to face one's own ignorance, and readiness to recognize, accept, and correct one's mistakes. The very moment we say, "This is right because it is science," it ceases to be science. Of course, science has gotten many things wrong in the past, including eugenics. Nonetheless, the scientific community will remain our most reliable source of knowledge, as long as we stay humble and open to criticism. We in the 21st century look at the advocates of eugenics in the 20th century and criticize them, saying how foolish they were. Among the things we firmly believe in the 21st century, what will be laughed at and criticized by people in the 22nd century, saying how foolish they were.